Chris, we're ready for the bulk of our meeting, the interviews and selections of our general consultant.
Sit down and strap in, right? At this point in the exercise, I will just, with Harry be the timekeeper for you, we'll help usher the consultants in and out. It really is your chance to get to know them and ask them questions. As you can see on INV 105, we set up a time period that's condensed. They get the first 30 minutes, but we really try and ask them to move quickly. The point is to give you time, at least 25 minutes, but I would say take all the time you need. If you run out of questions, fine, but keep talking. You don't have to just constrain yourselves, and you can interrupt them and say, get to the point on stuff. It's really your chance to get to know these firms and talk about them and think about them. We gave you the option after the last search 3 years ago. One of the feedbacks from the board was they might be interested in switching consultants, but they wanted to be able to kind of know people better and test drive firms. So we split the services into two groups. The best analogy I can come up with is if you think you hopefully watched a lot of sports, a lot of football this weekend. Service A, which is the performance consulting and the policy, is kind of like the coaches that are up in the booth with their headsets talking to the players on the field. They would be somebody who would come forward, comment on every policy, talk about strategy, where we're taking the portfolio. They'd be right there sort of in the game with us and with you. Services B would be more like the color commentator sitting in the booth next door who just gets to watch it all and come in and give comments and feedback and suggestions. So they would be coming in twice a year with your performance report that they would put the summary together and they would do the asset allocation consulting on. We think the portfolio should be tilted this way. They would do the once every 3 years asset allocation study for you. You have the choice. The way we wrote the RFP is very optional. So you can pick a firm to do A and pick a different firm to do B, or you can pick one firm to do A and B. It's really up to you. So we wanted to keep you totally flexible in what you want to do. You'll see our scores at the staff level. 4 people responded. We provided all 4 responses. We gave you some feedback in here on procurement did a nice job of going back to the industry to find out why we didn't get more responses, and it was a varied mix of reasons that they presented. But we think all 4 firms are of quality. I'll pass out for you some suggested questions. They're only suggested. And I'll also pass out to you a short comparison sheet so you can see on both sides of it all the firms on one page. That'll give you some information.
One of the concerns I had, Chris, was about the 25 minutes that we have allotted for questions. You answered it, but I want to make sure I think maybe Mr. Bartow may weigh in. We could go over 25 minutes with one of the consultants and not necessarily use full 25 minutes with another consultant. And we could go over an hour with one consultant and not use the full hour with another consultant.
As long as the other consultants have the opportunity, if you want to go longer than the hour, up to the amount that you previously went over. So everyone has the same shot, but if you don't need that extra time, you don't have to take it. It's up to you.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yes, and so I would just ask the committee members, we have 25 minutes. We may wind up using more, but as we're asking questions, if we could just be sensitive of our own, the amount of time we're using so that others can weigh in, and then maybe we'll circle back around. Mr. Utterman?
Sorry.
Let me buzz you in there. Tom, you got to...
Yeah.
There you go.
The half-hour presentation, that frankly strikes me as long.
Okay.
Could we ask them to condense at this stage of the process and do that to everybody?
You can do anything you want to them. I like that idea because it forces them to think on their feet.
Right. Because, I mean, having looked at 350 pages about these people. I do have questions for them, but I really don't need to hear the biographies and all that.
Okay. How long do you want to give them?
I have a suggestion.
15's good.
15.
All right, so we'll change that to 15 minutes.
Cool. We'll keep them on their toes. I like it.
And I think maybe we could ask them to focus on, if we have things we want them to focus on in their 15 minutes, we could do that at the beginning, and then they really would have to think on their feet.
Okay. I'll time them and just tell them when their time's up. And then at the end, we leave time at the end for you to, we usher them out of the room. They're up in different floors here. They could theoretically watch on the internet, but I've asked them to be polite to each other and not do that. And they all know each other fairly well. It's a small community. But once they're done, we usher them out. And then it's open to you to vote and debate and decide how you want to do it. You would approve one or two firms subject to final negotiation of terms and conditions. Let me know how much you want to negotiate on fees. And in the past, I've usually just gone back to the chair of the committee to say, they budged to here or not here. And fees generally weren't a dividing factor for people. But if it is, then we can have follow-up conversations, whatever you need. But we'll negotiate the fees and then get to work right away on the contracts, get those done lickety-split.
Mr. McGuire?
Chris, if it's possible, if we're going to change sort of the guidelines, see how they think on their feet relative to 30 down to 15 minutes, if there's some way that you can just let them all know that like 5 minutes in advance instead of one of them, last one would have 2 hours plus to consider that.
Yeah, unfortunately,
Okay.
we're broadcasting. I'm hoping they're not watching, but that's
Okay.
what my thought would be, is just to give
All
them a
right,
quick
thank you.
heads up as we're walking in.
Thank you.
Mr. Arterman?
The last portion of this process, is that also done in public, or? It is, okay.
Yes.
Including the fee negotiation questions?
I guess just what we've usually said in the past is if you want us to negotiate the fees. We haven't done it in open session, but just a direction to staff of, are there any terms or conditions? Is there a key man clause or a particular fee you think, they ought to lower them, that kind of thing?
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we're ready, Chris.
Okay. You want to go get first firm, or who's going to get them? You're here? You're in the room?
Oh,
Whoops.
I guess we blew that whole idea out of the water. I thought they weren't supposed to be in the
You got 15
room.
minutes, come on up.
What happened there, Brian?
Would you like us up here? Yeah,
Right here at the front.
we did hear you loud and clear. We were asked to come
That's a
in.
little weird.
But it's bubble.
Okay.
My fault.
I know, wasn't it sort of like a, we call it
Yeah, the same one I said electronically.
They didn't get much more than 5, so we're good. Thank you. You have to ask me what about your name from. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
It's the same thing I sent you electronically, just that way.
Perfect. This is awesome.
I did nothing. I'll time you guys once Harry starts.
Mr. Arterman?
Hi, good morning, and since your time has been compressed, we thought, you heard, we might raise some questions with you first that we'd particularly like you to focus on. So I had had a series.
Tom, before we just do that, I just would like to welcome
Sure.
them to STRS, and I don't know if Mr. Miller, you're going to introduce your team or who the lead is.
I'm Becky Gratzinger. I'm the CEO of RV Coons.
Okay, terrific. Would you just introduce your team? And then we
Absolutely.
can go right back to Mr. Arterman.
Okay, thank
And
you.
welcome.
Thank you so much. To my right is Jim Voico, our president and senior consultant. To my left is Christian Eicher, associate consultant, and Jeremy Miller to the extreme right of the table.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Mr. Utterman?
Thank you. Well, welcome again. And so I had a couple of areas I wanted to hear your point of view on. One, we have a large commitment to global equity, that and indexing versus active management, how you see that, where you think you can add value. Second is in the alternative asset area, your thoughts about basically hedge funds and real assets, the value of those as having, well, the value they have in a portfolio and balancing equity risk, and particularly whether you focus on, when you look at correlations like that, whether you look at historical correlations or whether you also test against periods of maximum stress and risk. So those are the things I'd like to hear about.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. We're delighted to be here, and we will make very good use of our time. Inside the front cover, you can see the table of contents of the materials that are in this book. As I mentioned, I'm CEO of RV Coons & Associates. I've been with the firm since 1994. Sorry.
We don't have the
What you're referring to?
book in front of us.
Oh, it looks like it's.
So I don't know. Oh,
It's okay, it's coming up on the screen.
Sue's got it.
Okay.
this doesn't cut into their time. This won't cut in. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you.
All right. Inside the front cover, you can see the table of contents we'd like to cover. I just made a brief comment before we started that I've been with RV Coon since '94 and have been CEO since the end of 2008. So it's a delight to be here. On the table of contents, we just show you the material that's in this book. We'll use just a couple of pages. The majority of the information behind the tabs is for your consideration after this meeting if you're interested in more information on some specific areas such as asset allocation, manager research, et cetera. We're, again, excited to be here. We'd like to really concentrate on our credentials, the structure of our firm, our experience with large, complex plans, and how we believe we can add value for CalSTRS. If you'll turn with me back to page 1, Jim is going to reiterate the mandate as we understand it.
This is a very simple page. It simply says, "We get it." That's how we titled the page. We read your RFP carefully. We understand that this mandate is to serve the board and the investment committee. We think we know how to do that. As I said to our team, there probably is no more important thing to do when you're seeking a job is to understand what it is you're being asked to do. So we read your mandate carefully, and we understand it clearly.
Page 2 just shows you visually the structure of our firm in terms of ownership. We own ourselves, so we direct our future. You can see at the bottom that we have over 400 clients, and we advise to over $1 trillion in assets. And the team that you see in front of us, 3 of us are in Oregon at headquarters, and one of us, Jeremy Miller, is in California. And we'd like you to remember again about our structure. Not only do we own ourselves, but we have no conflicts of interest and never have since the beginning of the firm back in 1985.
Let me spend a moment talking about our application of our capabilities to categories A and B. The first thing that I would ask, and I have been a trustee on a major public plan as well as a chief investment officer and an executive director, is have you ever done this before? And that's the point of page 3. We have done this before. This is a list of major statewide, very complex public plans. You, of course, are among the largest in the country. And I think that this particular list gives you a sense that we have a substantial amount of cumulative experience in working with large public plans. And we hope that that acts as a credential in terms of our capabilities of doing either A or B or both in terms of your scope of work. These funds, by the way, we are all the general consultant to. And they range across the country, as you can see. And the last point I'd make about this is that these people have worked together before. For example, on the very large New York State Common Retirement Fund, Jeremy and I worked together on that team. On the state of Michigan, covering all of their funds with the exception of the municipal system, Becky and I work on that. And Colorado Para, Becky and Christian work on together. So we have experience working together, and our firm has experience working on large public funds. If you turn to page 4, the point of this slide is very simple, and that is that not only are we the general consultant to large, complex public funds, but we also have a large number of mandates of a specialized nature that I think is very relevant to the special types of tasks that you might give us under A or B or both. And this is a list of public funds as an example, and there are other ones in which we're not the general consultant, but we do have a specialized role. In New Jersey, for example, we're the specialty real estate consultant. In Orange County, again, the specialty real estate consultant. In Oregon, the college savings plan, we're the consultant to. Washington State, we do projects for them. We're on their project list, and we work on infrastructure, real assets, and private equity. Texas ERS and Texas A&M, again, real estate. For CalPERS, one of your sister funds, we have done custody, custom TRD creation and maintenance. State of Florida, we've done a number of projects for. In the state of North Dakota, we've actually working with them right now to start up a brand new fund that's a statewide fund. So not only have we acted as general consultant to large public funds, but our capabilities have extended into retainers for specialized challenges as well.
On page 5 is a listing of the services that you read about in the RFP, and they contain both the service and support that you're looking for both Part A and Part B of the mandate. So we wanted to be able to reiterate that. And through the years, we've grown this service list, and the shareholders remain very committed to investing in the firm year after year and expanding the list of services that we see on this page.
If you turn to page 6 for a moment, this is a very important page. There's a cliche that is often said, it's all in the delivery. Well, it applies to investment consulting as well. You can have all the capabilities in the world, and if you can't bring them effectively to bear at the point of decision, they're not of any use to your client. We've thought about that over the last 10 years as we have built capabilities in our firm. We thought just as much about how to bring them to bear at the point of decision. So we have created a consulting model that is pretty unique to our firm, certainly with respect to the degree that we pursue it. We've expanded it, we've deepened it, we've strengthened it. It's the RVK team consulting approach, and you see a flavor of it sitting in front of you. No firm in our industry takes team consulting to the depth that we do. And we think that that's important because as the number of challenges in managing a big, complex plan with multiple products and multiple risks has really exploded on board of trustees and investment committees, that it's important that a consultant not be just a lone ranger, that in fact a lot of different talents get brought to bear. We've embraced that in a way that goes beyond anybody in the industry. So
I'm going to allow committee members to ask questions while you're presenting, and Mr. Underman has a question.
So I guess that may total some of your 15 minutes. But so could you drill down a level on what that team consulting approach means in sort of day-to-day operation with us?
absolutely. What it means is that every client at RVK has a team associated with it. The success or failure of those individual professionals is tied to the success or failure of their teams in terms of compensation, reviews, and all the other things, promotions, and so on. Those teams are constructed with senior leadership and also specialized capabilities. On your team, for example, my colleague Jeremy is our director of capital markets. We saw quite clearly that that would play a role in one of your mandates, in fact, both of your mandates. And so we wanted Jeremy on the team. And so we actually have roles on our team. And Christian plays a role as the AC. You might think of him, if you've ever been in the Navy, as the officer on the deck. His job is to make sure that the entire team is aware of all the projects going on with respect to the client, when things are due, what the client expects, what information is needed. We call it 360 full forward vision. And so we've worked at this year after year to try to perfect how good a team can be in terms of serving a client. And what we have found is that no client that we've ever moved to this team consulting approach has ever wanted to go back to sort of the Lone Ranger consulting model. So I hope that gives you a flavor. We also have techniques inside the firm to make sure that nothing falls between the cracks. We have an internal team email, which we will give to you, so that you can speak to the entire team, or your senior staff can speak to the entire team with a single email. I hope that gives you some flavor for how much we've pressed the sort of sense of teamwork here.
Yeah, very good.
Just because I'm aware of time, I thought we should give a moment to address the questions that you had up front, and perhaps illustrate the team concept in the process. You had asked about global equity, and this certainly implementing equity exposure through a global approach is something Jeremy and his capital markets team has been looking at from an asset allocation perspective. And from a practical point of view, our investment manager research department has been spending a lot of time on global mandates as clients consider releasing the decision of where they're picking countries, their domicile as part of a broader mandate as opposed to a designated regional exposure. So this is something we're definitely seeing. And in terms of active versus passive, we find that mandates that are more specific to domicile, for example, domestic equity, having a 70-30 mix, 80-20 mix index versus passive is very common for assets your size, certainly. Looking at active management for more of the international world with specific application to emerging markets is something we definitely agree with as well. We think there's so many decisions that can be additive there in terms of value.
And we had a discussion just as we were waiting to come in about the challenge of diversifying against equity risk in today's fixed income environment. In past times, and I've been in the business for more than 30 years, it was much easier to counterbalance equity risk with fixed income. Today, it's not so easy for obvious reasons with yields as they are. So Jeremy, as our Director of Capital Markets Research, and myself as overall Director of Research, we've worked with strategies in our consulting teams to try to piece together more niche-like exposures that cumulatively play the role of trying to reduce the excessive risk that a focus on equity will often lead a fund to have. It's just harder these days. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that,
Yeah,
Jeremy.
and I think we tried to build it into the process, whether it's in the quarterly meetings, the performance reports, anything the client looks at to try and take that step back and look at those risk factors or exposures, which I know there's been discussions about that, to go back and look at not just what are you investing in as a label, but how does it behave and how does that affect your portfolio. And I think that's something that people need to pay more attention to going forward, and something that we've implemented in our various documents that we give to each of our clients, and we've done for some years now, to help them understand that not every investment label describes how it behaves, and making sure you have those counterbalances, realizing that some of how things have behaved in the past may not be how they behave going forward.
Examples of the type of niche type positions you establish.
You mentioned some of them, hedge funds, particularly certain types of low volatility hedge funds that have low equity directionality. Commodities is another example. Even within the equity component, low volatility equity can play some role. But the whole idea is, and to go back to the last part of your question, is not only to look back historically and say what's been had lower correlations with equity, but also what will they be in the future. And with respect to your question about what happens during times of stress, we do know that correlations coalesce. And it's one of the reasons, and I tip my hat to my colleague Jeremy here, is that our asset allocations uniformly and routinely look at, in essence, non-normal distributions as well as high-stress periods to try to get a sense of downside risk that's associated with those, the coalescing of correlations. So it's a routine part of our risk management process.
Very good.
And in assessing those markets, we actually look at setting asset allocation assumptions every year for the next 10-year and longer rolling window. So we have a chance to make sure those assumptions are fresh and evaluation of the market is fresh as well.
You have 2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay. Just a note on page 7, you can see how we've structured ourselves from the investment consulting side of the firm, where we've continued to invest over the years. And on the right-hand side, the company operations have also been a source of investment. On page 8 is just a pyramid of the hierarchy of activities that are needed in institutional fund management. And again, we believe we have all the services to help you as you implement all these services in Part A or Part B or both, and we're quite confident in that. Page 9 is our wrap-up page. So to sum up, we believe we fully understand the mandate that you have proposed and embrace it. Jim's noted the breadth of some of those tasks in some of his comments. And again, we would very much like to be considered for both Part A and Part B. Some of the reasons that and approach that we take in meeting the challenge of this assignment is we do have a very experienced consulting team in front of you with senior leadership of that team. We provide independent and proactive advice. We use this team model and believe that it will be a very efficient way to implement these 2 assignments, and we draw upon the resources of the entire firm in meeting your needs. So with that, we would be delighted to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll open it up for questions. Mr. McGuire?
Thank you. Looking at the 2 assignments, which of the 2, if you're only going to be hired for one, which of the 2 do you feel you could add the most value and why?
We talked about this a lot. Jim, you want to go ahead?
We did. As we looked at both mandates, they are different in several respects, and I think the comments earlier were on point with our thinking. The second mandate, B, is very much in the sweet spot of a general consultant. We do these things every day for funds, large, small, and intermediate. We have an extensive track record in asset liability studies and asset allocation. We think we could do a great job there. Looking at the Category A, the fact that we have such senior leadership on the team with many, many years of experience of consulting, it's also very attractive to us. Becky and I also serve as senior advisors to a number of funds and have done that role before. We have experience in essence, representing the board versus, and I don't mean this in opposition to, but as a second opinion or the board's view on different investments that either the senior staff would like to make or one of your discretionary managers or non-discretionary managers. So we think we could add value in both instances, and we had a tough time answering that question ourselves.
Mr. Rosensteel?
Thank you. So one of the, as consultants to us, we have an investment staff. We have an excellent investment staff. So the question that I'm trying to wrestle with is, what do you do to make us a better investment committee when we already have a really excellent investment staff? And part of what I'd like to get a sense from you is, if you were to give us a list of questions to ask our investment staff, given what our performance has been, what the market is going through, your outlook, et cetera, what would be a few questions that we should be asking our investment staff about so that we make sure that we're on top of things, not letting things slip by? You're the experts who are advising us who are not as expert as you are on investment matters.
Some of the questions that would come to mind, and maybe this will illustrate the way we've worked with a few other clients that have what we call a very strong staff model, is looking ahead at the capital markets and saying, what issues do we expect to be presented in front of you? And in the earlier comments, certainly there is concern as we look forward and look at the price of equities here in the U.S. So one of the questions is, as we continue to look at our equity investments, is it at a level that you're comfortable with going in the future? Is the allocation either by region or by style mindful of some of the prices and valuations that we're paying for some strategies like small cap here in the U.S.? And are there any other asset classes that could be beneficial to the program overall? We know that real estate is a very good diversification with equities. We know your inflation hedge category that's fairly new, that you're building up to 5%, also has a correlation advantage. We know that private equity ultimately has a high correlation with equity strategies, and we know fixed income has a very favorable correlation when we look at equity investments, but we're not as optimistic about the return levels to earn from fixed income. So some of the most impactful questions we can ask up front or suggestions we can make up front are really asset allocation oriented rather than the structure of how much active versus how much passive in an individual asset class. Jim?
Yeah, it's interesting having sat in your chair. One of the things that I found most helpful when I was a trustee were sessions in which the long-term strategies that were embedded in essence, the sum of the individual investment decisions that were made over time, what did they amount to? What kind of internal bets are being made in the total fund over a period of time? And how are they working? Because standard performance reporting doesn't always pull out the strategies that are in essence built up either deliberately or incidentally by 30 or 40 investment decisions over the course of the year. That is where we could help a lot. A second area is in risk management. All of us, including your staff, which is one of the most seasoned in the business, without a doubt, have tremendous pressure on us to produce returns. One of the things that we can do is to try to get the closest sense we can, not of your staff's sense of risk tolerance, but of your sense of risk tolerance, and represent it in the discussions with your staff and vendors and money managers as these granular decisions are building up. So those are two examples where I think we can add a lot of value and represent the sensibilities that are on the dais as opposed to those that are in the mix of decision-making specifically. Those are already well represented.
Mr. Utterman?
Yeah. Following up on that last comment, could you give 2 or 3 examples over the past, say, 3 years of advice you gave that created value, and a couple examples where it didn't quite work, because that happens too, and explain the reasoning on both sides?
I'll start off with 2 examples. One that worked very well but was very stressful. And I think it's an example of how willing we are to stand up and say, this is probably not a good path to go down. In March of 2009, we had a meeting with a statewide pension plan. And if you remember March of 2009, that was the time when the S&P hit 666, and there was panic in the air. And I don't care how long you've been in the business, including myself, you had to feel quite a bit uneasy. The proposal came forth out of the blue to reduce very, very substantially the equity position of the fund as a kind of impulsive move. And in that particular case, the senior staff, for whatever reason, decided that they wanted to go along with the board. We actually came down out of the audience and stood in front of the board and said, we can't be sure that it won't get worse from here, but this does not seem like a prudent move. There's been no analysis, there's been no forward thinking about this. It turned out that that added tremendous, tremendous value because the board in the end opted to stay the course, and of course, by the end of the year, equities had rebounded very dramatically and have continued to do so. A case where it didn't work out so well dates back to 2005 or 6, and we restructured, I remember, an equity mandate, international equity mandate for a large public fund. And I think all of us got caught up with what I call the methodological bias of recency. It happened to be at a time when quant funds over the past 5 years preceding that had done very well. And I think we didn't resist strongly enough. And this subsequently, this particular episode became one of the central features of a white paper that Jeremy wrote for our firm talking about fighting against behavioral bias. And we actually selected too many quant-oriented firms, and they were too correlated with one another. So that's an example where it didn't work out so well. And subsequently, we had to restructure that equity composite again, that international equity composite again, and now it's working very well.
Thank you.
Mr. Zeiger?
A couple of quick questions. I like the team approach, but who do I call?
We also anticipated that you'd ask that question. We also thought you may ask the additional question, who are you going to see at your meetings?
I figured those are one and the same.
Absolutely. And the short answer is you will see the three of us on your left. And typically what we would hope for is to have two of the three of us at your meetings. We are very cognizant it may be one from time to time, but our hope is that you would become so familiar and comfortable with the team that any one of the three of us or two of us would be comfortable for you. And in terms of who you call, the answer is the same. And we'd invite you to check our references and ask how well that multiple team component is working. And I think you'll find they feel comfort in knowing that with airline schedules and other schedule challenges, they always have a very knowledgeable person on the other end of the phone. And Christian keeps us all straight from a workload and current project perspective.
It's interesting that our team structure tasks our associate consultant to be the whipmaster, if you will. But I think the proof is in the pudding, and you're exactly right. When somebody says you're going to be served by a team, the question is, do things fall between the cracks? No. We urge you to call every one of those public funds that you see on that list. They're all served by teams, and ask, do issues fall between the cracks? We know what the answer will be, but we also know that that's a trust that has to be earned. Mm-hmm.
And I'm really not worried so much about things falling through the cracks. I'm more worried about me remembering who to call.
So you'll have our personal cell phone number, so it's not going to be a problem.
Sorry. The other question I had is, you mentioned in here that you're 100% conflict-free. What does that mean in this context? I'm not quite sure what I understand what that means.
Yeah, that means that we have no financial relationships with money managers or other service providers. Our only revenue comes from clients, and it's been that way since the very beginning.
And are there times when there are conflicts between your clients? You're serving many others who are, I don't know if they're competitors, but they're in the same line of work we're in.
We have never taken on an assignment with a money manager to work on their pension plan. We routinely refuse those because we think those do create conflicts of interest. We had one situation where a longtime client, professional services corporation, entered a business that was of tail risk hedging. Yeah. Very minor business in there, but it was one where we could see that there was at least some possibility that we might be asked by other clients to vet their service. And so the first thing we did is they went immediately onto pro bono, so that we would have no financial ties, but we did not want to fire a client who had been with us for more than a decade. And then we are gradually working our way out of it and so as not to leave them abandoned. But we have no financial relationships. I think the simplest way to say it is that anytime an issue comes before you that involves a vendor or a strategy or anything else, you can be sure that the only incentive we have is the same one you have.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
You provided to us a list of your clients, and the list is long and impressive. What can you say to us to provide us with the assurance that you have additional capacity to take STRS in such a large fund as us as additional client?
We've thought carefully about how we've structured this team and then all the support that makes this team possible in making sure we can provide our offer to you. And we feel very good about it, and part of it has been because of the team structure that we've set up. If we were in front of you and didn't have an associate consultant and a third team member, if it was just a couple people that were really doing all the support work and doing that for all those other relationships, I would definitely be concerned. But given the overall structure that we've created here, what you'll find is that this is the core team, and as we have projects, we're pulling in the relevant portions of the firm to help us during that time, and that expands capacity as well.
going back to the question of who you might see at a meeting, you will certainly see us. But you may very well see that we bring a specialist with us when there's a task or an issue that is, where their special capabilities are relevant. That's one of the beauties of having arranged the firm the way we have. No one has an incentive to do anything else except help the consulting teams because we have no other lines of business. So it's either that or they do something else.
And we're all incented to advance the entire firm, not just our own individual client lists, and that's very different as well.
Mr. Rosensteel?
Thank you. Yeah, a couple quick questions. One is just a follow-up on this question of conflicts. So since you are completely conflict-free, does that mean you are a fiduciary to CalSTRS? Are you our fiduciary?
We're a co-fiduciary, and that's contractual as well.
What do you mean co-fiduciary?
There's a difference in fiduciary standards when you actually handle money and move money back and forth between accounts as opposed to providing non-discretionary advice. But we comply with the code on the non-discretionary element in the delivery of investment advice.
In fact, we won't take a general consulting assignment where we are not a co-fiduciary because we don't think it's best practice.
Second of all, following up on a question that I asked earlier about what value you bring, one of you, I think, said something to the effect of one of your values is to help us understand what our risk tolerance is as a board. How do you do that? And what does that then mean in practice?
There are certainly some quantitative tools that help us on that front. And one is actually looking at the possible returns you could experience in your current and alternative structures and making sure that you're comfortable with what the downside could be. And unfortunately, all of us are recently scarred by '08 and know what a very poor market could be. But those kind of tools give you an idea of what the downside market experience really could be. And those are part of what helps you assess risk tolerance. But there are also many other kinds of risks, as we see in reading your documents, about how you assess risks as a board. And some of those are also extending to the fact that we're a pension plan. You have guidelines as to how much you will allow in illiquid investments. So we look at that risk. Another thing that we measure every quarter also is your sensitivity to any one market. We actually look at the equity beta for your entire portfolio and all of your asset classes to give an idea of how much dependence you have on any one market that could lead to your overall risk experience. We measure in your performance reports the contributions to volatility and where they're coming from the portfolio. So it's really a mosaic of a number of measurable items that help assess how you feel about risk. And then once you have a direction or a feeling of how much risk can be tolerated, letting you know what that implication is for the portfolio structure going forward. I don't know, Jim or Jeremy, if you want to add to that.
Let me just jump in there, because that all sounds very technical. And I mean, I don't think that if you ask this board what is our risk tolerance for taking on beta, that we would have an answer.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And we're long-term investors, right? And we've got a large portfolio, and we've got money coming in, we've got money going out. Why shouldn't we just have a very long-term perspective of trying to? I mean, why is risk tolerance an issue for us?
That is a great question. There are many reasons to worry about risk. One is that you do pay benefits out of this pool, so it does matter when you have volatility in the marketplace. So that's something to be mindful of.
Let me give you an example of that. We have a large statewide plan where the board has historically been very risk tolerant, especially pursuing return for taking illiquid risk. In 2008, before we were hired, they were caught with that risk and in essence had a similar problem that Harvard had and other endowments had with too many illiquid investments. They had to sell liquid investments whose prices were very depressed that they didn't really want to sell. And so what we've done since we've been hired by that particular fund is that we have in essence replayed scenarios going forward. How would you feel if there was a decline of this amount where you would have to sell equity, for example, or fixed income at these levels relative to their historical valuation? You know, you are exactly right. Quantitative measures are they're easy to ignore because they're so, I don't know, they don't grab your imagination. It's why reporters write stories and they start off with a story of an individual to try to to make the example human and connect you with it. And part of our job is to try to take quantitative tools, history, forecasts, and try to make it real for you to try to gauge your sense of how bad or good you feel about taking a particular risk.
And the other thing we add to that, and this was also included in the requirements for this, this assignment, is actually getting an idea of what other peer systems are doing. And one of the things that we do twice a year is actually go out and survey about 90 other public funds to give you an idea of what their actuarial assumptions are, what their asset allocation is, what does their equity portfolio structure look like, how much active versus passive management. So again, as we're arriving to those discussions about how much risk you want to take, we can show you other examples of what other systems have done and what kind of risk they're taking on relative to their required returns, and that's helpful as well.
And there may be enterprise risks that go beyond your investment consultant's purview, but which we can help you with. For example, we have funds that tell us we really can't take so much risk that we have a significant chance of having a contribution spike to this level because we feel as an enterprise that it will cause pressure on benefits for either new tiers or legislative outcomes that that are not in our best interest or our participants' best interest. Those are not our purview, but we can help help you understand the scenario under which your concerns might actually become more real or less real.
Mr. Lawson?
Thank you. This organization is, well, the membership of this organization is extremely diverse. Senior management of this organization has gone out of its way, not gone out of its way, but it has paid particular attention to the diversity of the staff. Our investment team is very diverse, and there's a focus on diversity of the investment managers that we hire. Can you talk a little bit about the diversity of your organization, the organization as a whole, the team that would be assigned to us, and your commitment to diversity going forward?
Absolutely. We have several clients for which this is very important. In fact, one of my clients is one of the major funds in Illinois, and I'll be testifying in front of their Senate Committee on Diversity in a couple of weeks. And so one of the things that we've found is that diversity in our firm is very different depending on which office you're talking about because we draw from a local pool of qualified individuals. So some of the things that we've done in our firm is to make sure that our hiring practices are reaching out to universities, as well as making sure that the electronic means for which we advertise openings is broad and is going to reach those groups as well. So Portland, our headquarters looks very much like the diversity of Portland itself. Chicago, you see much more diversity in our staff there, and in New York as well. So this is something we're very conscious of. Actually, beyond our hiring practices, actually in our investment consulting practice, we find emerging managers by many different definitions of different states define what it is they're looking for, whether it's by ethnic group or whether it's by gender. We have quite a large practice of finding emerging managers that help those clients meet their goals as well. So hopefully that's helpful.
Just one other thing, by the numbers, our firm is heavily weighted in terms of its ownership and seniority toward women. The second thing is that we have increased our minority hiring across the country, but as Becky said, we're more able to do that in Chicago, in our Chicago and New York offices, and we have people of color and both males and females at every level of the firm, from shareholder and senior consultant all the way down to our administrative ranks. So I think our record stands for itself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McGuire?
This question is for Christian. Christian, I know you're an associate consultant with the firm. Perhaps you haven't had a chance to speak yet because we cut the presentation down from 30 minutes down to 15.
You do now.
But I'd like to hear from you how you perceive your role on this team and how you will add value.
I affectionately would refer to myself as the glue guy. These are very talented and capable individuals, as I view myself. But RVK is a firm of over 100, and getting these 4 individuals, as well as any of the other 96 plus individuals, to bring the strength of the firm together is my role in making sure that the strategic guidance that's coming from my team members in front of me, or from an asset class expert that's in our Portland office or one that's in Chicago, it's pulling that all together and making sure everybody knows what's going on, everybody knows what the goals are, everybody knows how what they're doing impacts anybody else on the team, communicating that to the board, as well as working with the plan staff to ensure that everyone's on the same page and things get done.
Cedric?
I just had a question of what you guys thought about some of our investment policies, because we've had some interesting conversations over the last couple of years since I've been on the board, and I just wondered if you could remark on some of the unique things that you see about our investment policies and be specific, and then also, are there things that you think are lacking in our investment policy? And I'd love to hear from just a blip from each of you, if that's possible.
Well, maybe I'll start out with one that we discussed this morning, actually, again, and we were talking about your rebalancing policy. You have what we call a strong staff model, and there are various models. You have a strong staff model. You delegate quite a lot. And we happen to be fans of delegation. When we were first hired at another statewide fund that had just gone through a fiduciary audit, part of hiring us was one of the recommendations out of that fiduciary audit. And the very first meeting was a private meeting with the board that said, how much should we delegate? What is your view? And we said that delegation was a good thing. It may sound strange for an investment consultant to say, but we think you should have a strong CIO and senior investment staff. We think that's the best practice for running particularly a large complex fund. And so when you look at something like rebalancing, we think that the logistics of moving money inside a fund as large as yours and trying to stay within your asset allocation guidelines, trying to make sure that benefits get paid and there's as little frictional cost of money moving inside the fund and outside, leaving the fund and coming in, is precisely the kind of delegation that you should leave to your senior staff, and it appears that you had. So that's an example of part of your investment policy that we think is very good.
Another thing I really liked about the policy is some of our clients' policies are so long and so detailed, and you've got yours divided between the policy and then your plan, your management plan, and the Part A and Part B actually make reference to those, because we realize that the management part of it, or the implementation portion of policy, changes from time to time as you look at opportunities in the marketplace. For example, your decision on a 70% passive domestic equity exposure and 30% active can change over time depending on how large the assets grow, as well as the expected alpha or expected value added from active managers. Some of the things that we liked is seeing the progression of your asset allocation and how you're implementing the inflation hedge program over time. Some of the things that I was a little bit more surprised about, just given the size of the pool, is that your fixed income investments are very straightforward and very traditional. And some of the things that some of our clients on the management plan side of things, or the strategy side of things, have really been pretty active in removing more allocation to just traditional Barclays aggregate exposure and into more private fixed income vehicles and more specialty vehicles taking on more credit. So the fixed income approach is fairly straightforward here, and we realize by doing that, what you've done is to preserve a traditional fixed income role in fixed income. So that's something that would be a very good conversation with the board, we think, going forward, is what are other plans doing in this interest rate environment?
We have on occasion, in fact more than a few occasions, where boards wanted to have extremely prescriptive and detailed granular investment policies, recommended to them that they actually separate it out into 2 board-approved documents. One is the philosophy and the true investment policy that's being pursued, and the general guidelines that can't be breached, and then an operations manual. This is a board-blessed document, but this is how things should be done. Mm-hmm. And it might involve, for example, how managers are selected, how RFPs are run, all of those kinds of things, so that they don't clutter up the key foundations or the pillars of investment policy, but they're still board stamped, board approved, and official operating dogma for the fund.
Can I just ask a follow-up? You made a comment earlier that, about delegation. I just wondered, do you think we delegate too much at CalSTRS?
We would
Too
have
much
to,
to
we would have, that's a hard thing to
curious what
say
you
from
thought.
the outside. We would have to observe how the decisions are made. But it would be fair if you hired us in these roles for after a period of time in which we've observed how decisions are made, to pose that question. We presume that that's part of the scope of work of either A or B for that matter.
And we would analyze it not only by looking specifically here at CalSTRS, but also giving you a view of what other plans are doing as well.
And what has worked and where it hasn't worked, why hasn't it worked?
Ms. Dillon?
So it's very obvious that you've done your homework on us and you're pretty familiar with a lot of not only our portfolio, but our policies and stuff. So what would be your first big project for us as a board? What would you bring to us to do differently?
Well, yes, in fact, we love work plans. We love actually laying out to you what we think should be important for the next year to 18 months. So that's probably the first thing, is talking through a work plan and getting some general agreement about, from our first observations, what do we think are the most important deliverables. And then, of course, the other thing that we'd always fall back on is one of the most important things we would do is participating and working through the asset liability and asset allocation activities, since it's in your own policies. You recognize the very large amount of returns that are generated and risk profiles generated by that one decision, 91%, I think your policy says. So that's going to be a key element of that work plan.
We joked about work plans, but it is like team consulting. It is gospel at our firm. And quite frankly, we came upon it because we kept asking ourselves, how can clients get more out of what we might be able to give? And the answer kept coming up. Give us some direction about where you're going. Collaborate on what you would like to look at, and we'll be more than happy to be proactive about that. And then people, experts like Jeremy, the kinds of people that Christian can bring to the table, we can tee that up and really do a great job for you. And that's why we care so much about work plans. We even have work plans for our own firm inside in terms of how we operate. So we eat what we cook, cook what we eat, whatever.
Seeing no one else in the queue, I'll have a couple of questions. One is around the ESG policy. I recently read that a rather small percentage of U.S. institutional investors actually have an ESG policy. I'm sure you're aware that here at CalSTRS, we're probably at the forefront in America on ESG policies. What is your firm's view on ESG policies in general, and whether or not you believe those policies actually add value to the portfolio? Not only in the equity markets, but in real estate as well, or private equity.
Well, we've discussed this internally many times, and it is a challenge because oftentimes we're not attorneys, but we've heard fiduciary counsel caution boards about criteria that might not be directly applicable to the participants, the beneficiaries of the fund. At the same time, we have many clients who ask us to incorporate into our decision-making ESG criteria or policies or sensitivities that they feel very strongly about, which we're more than happy to do. I mean, one of the experts, and I think this harks back to an earlier question, one of our consultants who works in the New York market is a former public fund CIO and a specialist in emerging manager programs. So our view is that those are legitimate policies to pursue if you can incorporate them in a way that that satisfies the fiduciary obligation to the participants. And as a consultant, we would say, and by the way, measure them to the best that you can, so that you can document that in fact you have done a good job doing precisely that melding of those two sets of criteria, if you will.
And we've also helped clients with those goals that have DC plans that want options to allow participants to participate participate in specific ESG vehicles. We've helped them find them as well. And there's a few out there.
Could I mention one other thing that was sparked by your CIO's comments about the gun manufacturer? We recently had a long conversation with somebody we hope to do some consulting for that has a very large multi-billion dollar religious institution. And they are very, very sensitive to these issues. When I say very sensitive, I mean VERY, very sensitive. And one of the interesting things that the CEO pointed out is that he has found over the years that the best way to take the policies and preferences and sensibilities of his fiduciaries and put them into action is actually exactly what you heard from your CIO, which is direct engagement with the money manager. And understanding that buying and selling companies can't be done on a dime, and that they're not the only participant in the fund, but direct engagement often has the biggest positive effect, if you will, the biggest end result. So I heard that conversation with interest because it harked back to what the other CIO had mentioned to us that was his adopted policy.
A second question. I'm paraphrasing, but a couple of very smart, probably some of the smartest investors have often said during periods of great exuberance, it's a good time to be very cautious. And during periods of great fear, it's a great time to take risk. Can you talk about why, to my knowledge, so few consultants in 2007, 2008 were advising their clients to scale it back?
It was very easy for consultants because they were making their clients happy, returns were looking good, to continue their real estate investments, to not be as concerned about the valuation of various investments, including equities. But during those times is actually when we were advising clients to continue diversifying and to really look beyond the current market environment that we're in today. And one could make the same argument as we're sitting around this table today. So we have looked at those periods in history and know that they have taught us some very severe lessons. Obviously, there were lessons back in 99 and 98 about the domestic equity market. We were talking to our clients at that point about moving into hedge funds and other alternative strategies and increasing their allocation to less diversified strategies because we knew how much of their overall portfolio was dependent on a market that had highly appreciated. So the saying that you've mentioned and stated here is encapsulating the basic investment principle that valuation does matter at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that institutional investors and consultants did not cover themselves with glory in 2005 to 2007. That's simply a matter of record. It is true that we were very, very active in pushing people into less correlated allocations. In fact, our allocations to less directional hedge funds went up and up and up. One of the things that I'm most proud about, though, about our firm is that in the middle of 2009, we had a major internal autopsy of what did we learn from this and what should we do differently going forward. And again, I want to credit our Director of Capital Markets, Jeremy, sitting to my right. We changed our asset allocation model completely. We put in non-normal distributions to capture tail risk. We amped up our stress testing quite a bit. We put liquidity measures in, liquidity metrics, so that we could catch when funds were edging toward the illiquidity traps. And also at that point, literally in March of 2009, we raised our forward expectations for equity and other equity-centric kinds of allocations. We raised our forward capital markets returns estimates, the biggest that we've ever done in the history of the firm. So our collars got a little tight at that point because things didn't look so great, but it turned out to be the right thing to do. And then subsequently, each year, we have pared some of that back. And I suspect, although this is really Jeremy's bailiwick, that we will probably get even more cautious as we enter the period that we're going into now, which we're refreshing our forward-looking capital markets expectations.
Did you want to add something, Mr. Mill?
I'm nodding my head in agreement.
Okay.
Jeremy and I talk about 3 times a day, so. think he finishes half of my sentences.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, then you have 5 minutes for closing comments, and it's all you.
I think one of the catchy phrases that we wanted to leave you with that maybe will summarize our presentation is hire an RVK consultant and you get a team, hire an RVK team and you get the entire firm. We really want to demonstrate for you that it's not only this team that would support this relationship, it's all the folks in our research department, it's all the folks in our performance analytics department. Every single department and specialty that we've developed is open and available for you. So there is no bottleneck that you need to go through to get the resources of this team and the firm. So we feel very well qualified, highly qualified, and extremely excited about both elements, Part A and Part B. That's why it's so hard for us to choose if given the opportunity to express their preference. So we'd like to leave that with you as well and tell you how delighted we are to have this opportunity. We would be a terrific partner, and we encourage you to call our references because we believe that they would echo the same thing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, thank you.